everyone, and welcome to Educate, Inform, and Challenge. My name is Teresa MacLennan, and I'm the Executive Director of the Women and Children's Shelter of Barrie. And our show is about all of the things related to the lives and experiences of women. And we aim to be transparent and have open and safe dialogue about all of the experiences that women have and young girls. And so before we begin with our wonderful guest today, we do want to thank our Indigenous people and communities for allowing us to share in this space and to have this dialogue and this conversation. We thank you so, so much. So today I am really happy to introduce my guest, and her name is Val Gates. Val, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Teresa. I always look forward to speaking with you.
So would you like to just tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Obviously, I'm a police officer. I am in my 23rd year of policing. So I started at a very young age, naive, I would say. I'm also a mother of 4. I'm married to another police officer, and I am a bulldog lover. So that's a little bit about me. Currently, my role at the Barrie Police, I've had many roles. The role that I'm in right now is to work sort of with the vulnerable downtown. So I'm in charge of the downtown area. But I also continue to work on things in regards to intimate partner violence, gender-based violence, and advocating for certain things like coercive control laws and Clare's law. So I stay really connected, and that is where my passion is. And, you know, the majority of my career was spent in domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse. So it's never really left me, and I will continue to do that for as long as I can.
So I know that there is a lot that we could talk about, especially in relation to the work that we do here at the shelter. But today we wanted to talk about your journey to the position that you're in now and how you got there. And so, I mean, of course, you know, our work in large part is to talk about barriers that personal and both systemic, that may stop young girls and women thinking that they could become a police officer. And so can you talk to us about what your journey was like in terms of getting to where you are now? Like, did you always want to be a police officer?
Well, first, I would just like to start out by saying thank you. Thank you for bringing this, you know, to the forefront. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we wouldn't have had a female police officer on a show talking about, you know, their journey. So I think that in and of itself speaks volumes to where we're going as a community. Did I always want to be a police officer? Yes. I cannot remember a time not wanting to be a police officer. My dad was a police officer, so I grew up around them. I didn't realize growing up that I was at any sort of disadvantage. My father taught me that I can do whatever I set my mind to. I grew up with a brother and a sister. Some would have described me as a tomboy back then, but really right now when I describe my daughter, she's an athlete. So I really wanted to do it. And I went to school. I worked really hard. I had quite a few no's before I had a yes. And I was first hired in Peel in 1997. And it was really eye-opening for me, I think. I was the only female on a shift of 25 men. Even then, I don't think I realized the full impact of being the only female, because I think what I did, and it's easy to look back now and say, you know, I think I conformed a little bit. I think I lost myself a little bit to fit in. And I think I had to then. I don't regret doing that. I've had many great mentors, but I think when it really started to hit me a few years into policing in Peel, I was lucky enough to be placed on the bicycle unit. And I was patrolling one day and I came to a park and there was a mother and a young girl. I think she was about 5 or 6. And the mother said, "Do you mind coming over here and meeting my daughter?" I said, "Absolutely, I'd love to." She's like, "Good, because she's never seen a female police officer and she didn't know that she could become a female police officer." So that was the first time I honestly think I realized, wow, do little girls actually think this? So that was when I decided, okay, not only do I want to be a successful police officer, I want other girls to know, and women, that this is a great career for them. And so, from that day on, I made sure to try and be me, and try not to conform as much, if that makes sense. Try not to be necessarily one of the boys. I wanted to be me. And were there barriers then? I don't think I realized as much then as I do now what I went through, but it was that little girl, and I wish I got her name, and I wish I could have followed up to see where she is now, but that little girl doesn't know, what she did for me back then, so many years ago.
And I love, how you described what you were taught and what you knew growing up, that personally, there were no barriers to whatever you felt that you wanted to do. So looking what you know now and looking back then, how would you describe not the personal barriers, but perhaps the systemic things that were in place that perhaps you weren't even know you were dealing with, but now you can see what they are? Can you talk to us a little bit about that and help us to understand what actually was that?
I think early on, the first thing I started to feel, and I think a lot of women feel like they're not good enough, that they were let into the club. They were a token. It was tokenism. And I think we do that as women anywhere that we go anyways. We work harder than our male partners. We think less of ourselves than we do of them. We measure ourselves against them, where we're very different than them. But back then, and still to a day, it's starting to change now, but the way that we measured a successful police officer, or the way that the society viewed a police officer, was this big 6 foot, burly man that was going to come in and arrest the bad guy. So I think, some of those systemic barriers that we didn't realize were there were really based on the community's perception of the role of police. And then you can go into sort of things like, we had mat leave that we had to go on. So we're already put way behind, a year or whatever. We come back from mat leave and we have this tremendous mother's guilt that we've all been through. And so we start looking for positions that maybe are better for a better work-life balance. And so those positions are viewed, not as highly, maybe, so to speak, as some of the other positions. So you're behind the ball when it comes to promotion, because you haven't held one of these other positions that you need to really hold to sort of get that promotion. So those were some of the things that I think we just accepted as reality. We need a day job because historically it's been the mom that picks your children up when they're sick, or that's up all night when they're sick, So that work-life balance and the perception of community, and also the way that we measured success in policing and in our human resources, those were all systemic barriers that I don't think we recognized or accepted. We just thought that's the way it is, and that's the way it has to be. Those were the systemic ones for sure.
Yeah. And so when you think about that, I'm just wondering, I can remember hearing a story of, the early days when there were female officers, that women had to carry their gun in their purse. And, I just think about how things have changed over the years in such incredibly great ways, right? If you think about how, and maybe you can talk about this, did you feel that you needed to adapt and change as a woman to be able to be successful in those early days?
Absolutely. I absolutely did. I had to, when I was on shift for 12 hours, become stoic, uncaring to a sense. I had many great mentors, but they were all men. So when I looked to the left, the right, up and down, they were all men. So there was a point in my career, shortly after my son was born, that I started thinking about promotion, but wanted to speak to someone like, how can I make this work? How can I find a work-life balance? And there was nobody to speak to. So I think it's okay, I need to emulate a man to be successful. but I'm already going to lose because he's not the one leaving shift or calling in to take care of his child. So I'm already behind the ball there. So I think, that was a huge issue back then, that there was just no mentorship for us. There was I couldn't share how I was feeling because then you would be judged and you would be perceived as weak. You're supposed to leave it at the door and go home and forget it. And I don't know what human can do that. So all of those things were really tough. And I just really remember thinking, I wish there was someone else I could talk to about this, that would get it. There wasn't until Chief Greenwood came to the Barrie Police Service, who was the only female boss, and she's not my direct boss, but the only female boss that I have ever had in my career.
Wow. And so, but was it before Chief Greenwood was there that you were actually making movement forward in your career?
I was promoted to one rank up before Chief Greenwood got here. So I was looking around to try and speak with someone, and there was no one. So I remember thinking, I'm not ready. And we all know typically women will not put in for anything until they've checked all those boxes. But it was my father who said, you need to go for it. Mm-hmm. And so I did, and I ended up getting it. And again, that was when I thought, okay, I can be an example here. And I was an example in that rank for 9 years until Chief Greenwood arrived at the Barrie Police Service. Mind you, I had some wonderful, wonderful positions and was able to do some amazing things. I started working with you at the rank of sergeant as well. So I don't regret. I'm just grateful that I have my parents who have been such a huge support. And I don't think I would have put in then had my dad not said, yeah, you need to go for it.
Go for it. So we're going to take a quick break, but I want to circle back to that. The influence that, of course, you had in your life to be able to make decisions for yourself and your future and your career, but then also how you are now using your position, the growth that you've had to influence other young girls and women. So we'll be right back and we'll continue our conversation. Can you talk to us about the positive movement that's happening in policing that encourages more women to become police officers, but also then to think about, an upward career path in policing? So what is changing?
So we're seeing many changes, and I think we can all say that there is a movement, so to speak. And from my perspective, a very positive one. I think there's society really, and our communities are starting to recognize that, our police officers need to be more than the 6-foot burly guy coming in to arrest the bad guy, because they need to have communication skills. They need to show that they care. They need to be able to develop those relationships in our community, the genuine relationships with some of our vulnerable people, with just our regular neighbors. And we just bring this piece to policing that I'm not saying every man can't bring, because there's a lot of very, very caring men, and they all do care necessarily, but we can just more openly and genuinely express that. And I think that is really, really important. We need to be able to communicate with our partners, with our community. And I think what's resulted from that is, we're even looking at things through the province is looking at the whole process of getting onto the police force by looking at the standards for the testing standards. So the physical standards, do we actually really need to do this to do the job properly? So those things are happening. Other things, internally that help women maybe get promoted and move through the ranks is we're starting to value those skills, those communication skills. Yes, they took a day job in a community services unit. Well, you know how important our outreach with the community is? I would argue it's one of our most important jobs here at the Barrie Police Service. So why are we not valuing that the same as someone who spent a year in our tactical squad, doing warrants, which is also a very important skill. But the equity, it needs to come into policing and into some of our decisions. So I think just that in general is really, really a great shift for women, for everyone, really, because it's going to be fair across the board. And so our skills are getting recognized. We're feeling a little more valued. We are seeing ourselves at some of the tables when it counts. And I'm not going to lie, it can be exhausting at times, but, we now have such a strong leader in Chief Greenwood. And like I mentioned before we went on the break, she's my first female leader, and she has turned into such a great mentor for me. I'm so grateful that she came into, my life, into this service in 2013, because that was a great example for me. And she really pushed me to do things that I never thought I could do. And I really think that made a huge difference in my career.
So who do you feel is doing the majority of advocating for change to happen? And is that rightly placed, or does that need to look different as well?
I think it's happening at all levels of government. I think it's stemming from our communities and from the society. I think that is rightly so. I think even just speaking to you, Teresa, you are doing some amazing things for women everywhere. So of course it's going to, overflow into other agencies within the community. People like, Sunny Mariner, who is working to develop more transparency around sexual violence investigations. This demand for transparency, not in just our investigations, but internally from our police service, that's coming from our community, and that's where it should come from. We are here for them. We work for the citizens of Barrie, and nothing hurts me more when I think that they don't believe in us. So I think those voices are now being heard. And like I said, I didn't realize there were systemic issues when I started policing. I grew up quite privileged. And I think our community is now more in tune with it, more aware of it, and just demanding that we look at it. That's all. We need to start a conversation. We just need to understand it, look at it, and do our best, and just let everyone know what we're trying to do our best, because it's not going to happen overnight. If you talk to Chief Greenwood, she probably did put her gun in her purse. I didn't have to put my gun in my purse. But if you ask her how quickly things changed, she's 40 years in policing and just starting to see some great change.
And, we talk a lot in our agency that, of course, it's been the voices of women that have really moved, talking about gender equity, those discussions forward. And of course, we value and we want the voice of women to be heard and to be appreciated, respected, and taken for great value. But I do also believe, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, the voice of men in that regard of gender equity is equally as important. So what do you want to say about that?
Absolutely. And it's, I am married to a male police officer who is my biggest fan. And I think it's important to have men, not that it validates us, but what it does say to other men is it's okay. It's okay to talk about what you might have been feeling all of these years, but thought you couldn't say. So, and it needs to be men that are very well respected, and even in high positions, to say it's not okay anymore. Like, we are the example, and we need to take that seriously and with honor, and we need to move these women forward. And there are men that recognize our value and our skill and push us. And that's what we sometimes need, unfortunately, for them to push us. And so, yes, we need the support of the women. We need the voices of the community, but absolutely do we need the men to start speaking for us, not for us, with us. Because I think they spoke for us for too long. They're speaking with us and supporting us. And I think it's like my husband is amazing. And he's part of the reason as well that I keep going.
And that is exactly what we experience, of course, in our agency, because we support women, of course, as you know, who've experienced violence. And women have been using their voice, speaking out against violence towards women for years and years and years. But what we know, in order to interrupt conversations that demean women, that are harassing, that are sexually charged about women, when those conversations are happening, let's say between men,
Yes.
what we need and what it takes is one man in that group to say, I'm not participating in that conversation. And so when I think about your experience in policing, and perhaps, you know, as the only female officer at one time in your schooling, if there were conversations that were happening amongst men and you're the one female, having the voice of men to be able to say, you know what, we're not doing that anymore. That's old now, you know. We're talking about gender equity, the importance of both voices. I just, there's such incredible value in that.
Absolutely. You nailed that on the head. And it's not just in policing, it's in our entire society, the whole, you know, the rape myths and that sort of thing, that some men don't even know what that means or understand it. And when you explain it to them, they go, oh, because do you want your son, you know, treating women like that? Do you want your daughter treated like that? And so these are conversations that are happening here now every day. And I think people were just, I don't think there was always intent to hurt. I think it was just, they didn't realize, not all of them, but I think they just didn't realize. And I didn't realize a lot of things that I've contributed to over my career, that, you know, I've said things in situations where I didn't even know what it meant to fit in. And that, when I look back now, hurts. So, you know, and I think it's only fair to say that a lot of men probably felt that way too. So now that there's the awareness out there, there really is no excuse for it anymore. And so I think that's another thing we're doing really well here at the Barrie Police with. We are holding our members accountable, not just Barrie Police. I would hope other services as well. It's just not accepted anymore. It's really not accepted. You cannot breed that culture. You just cannot, because it would go outside of these walls, and it affects our service to everybody else. So you're right. That's definitely changing.
So you've already highlighted a few of the barriers that have started to come down, right? And of course, equal voice between men and women, and encouraging more women to, you know, become involved in policing, and opportunities for advancement in recognition of all of the hats and roles that women hold in their lives, mothers, you know, caregivers, the majority of the time. So is there any other thoughts that you have about further reducing barriers that actually needs to happen?
Well, this would be a continual conversation. I think we need to check in as an organization, we need to check in every 6 months or even every month with those who are the minorities within the organization. I just finished doing a full systemic review of our entire police service. So, you know, there's things that I learned through that I never would have thought about for some of our diverse groups that I think, okay, now what can we do? So I don't think we're ever going to be in a place that everything is removed, because it's very fluid and there's going to be something else that comes up. You know, overall, right now, what I think might be a barrier is this is a really tough time for policing in general. You know, so do women really want to get involved in that? And we don't like not being liked. It's just the way we're it's in our DNA, and it's tough. It's tough. But, you know, what I would want to say is, you know, right now, don't believe the noise. This is the time when we need you. We need women, because we need those communication skills. We need those relationships. We need to rebuild some things that maybe, you know, have been hurting over the last little while. So I think there is a huge barrier right now, just in that sense. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Val. So, you know, we have about 1 minute at a time, and I'd like to pose this question to you. So if we have a young girl who is watching our show today, or a woman, and she is interested, she sees in you who she wants to be, what encouraging words in like 1 minute or less would you offer to her?
I think I would tell her not to give up, surround herself with positive people, and just reach out. And if anyone is inspired by me today, I love mentoring young women to be successful. So reach out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Val, for talking with us today. And I just want you to know how much of a role model you are in the community and an inspiration to, well, myself, young girls and women. And I really appreciate having this really transparent, open, and honest dialogue about the movement, a bit of history, but the movement of women in policing, because I think it is, again, we need to be talking about things. We really need to acknowledge, where we have been, where we are now. And you spoke really, really well about, where we're headed, and we really hope that we will see equity in terms of policing, where we're not saying that there needs to be more women than men, but we want to have an equal voice at the table.
That's right.
And if the table isn't big enough, then let's build a bigger table so that we have more room for women to be there. So thank you again so much today. And we thank all of our viewers for being with us today. We really appreciate you coming along with us in this journey and having these great discussions, and certainly having this discussion with Val today, a very influential and meaningful woman in our community. Thank you so much. Take care.